There are some Hollywood love stories that feel carefully written for the cameras. And then there are stories that seem to happen in the spaces between the cameras, in awkward first meetings, stolen glances, inside jokes, playful arguments, quiet support, and little moments that were never supposed to become headlines. Tom Holland and Zendaya's story has always carried that second kind of feeling. Before the interviews, before the red carpets, before fans began analyzing every look, every smile, every interaction, and every tiny detail between them, they were simply two young actors walking into the same room for an audition. Neither of them could have known what that meeting would eventually become. They were there because of Spider-Man. They were there to work. They were there to audition for a movie that would become one of the biggest franchises in modern entertainment. But somewhere inside that professional beginning, something much more personal started taking shape. A friendship, a partnership, a trust, and eventually a love story. What makes their journey so fascinating isn't simply the fact that Tom Holland and Zendaya became one of Hollywood's most recognizable couples. It's everything that happened along the way. The awkward beginning, the chemistry, the teasing, the competition, the compliments, the support, the way they constantly seemed to make each other laugh. And most importantly, the way their relationship grew alongside their careers rather than existing separately from them. Their story, as presented through the moments in this transcript, is not built around one giant declaration. It is built around hundreds of small details. And sometimes, those details say more than a dramatic announcement ever could. Because when two people genuinely know each other, affection doesn't always look like a grand romantic gesture. Sometimes it looks like remembering what the other person wore. Sometimes it sounds like teasing. Sometimes it is simply being the person whose opinion matters most. And sometimes it is hearing someone describe their partner not merely as someone they love, but as their best friend, their greatest supporter, and one of the most important people in their life. That is what makes this story so compelling. And it all begins with a meeting that was, by their own memories, anything but smooth. Imagine walking into an audition room knowing that one of the biggest opportunities of your career could be sitting on the other side of the door. You're nervous. You're focused. You're trying to make the right impression. And then you meet the person you're supposed to have chemistry with. For Tom Holland and Zendaya, their first meeting wasn't some perfectly cinematic Hollywood moment. It was awkward. Almost painfully awkward. Tom has recalled that first introduction with humor, explaining how their attempt to greet each other turned into a strange mix-up. He went to shake Zendaya's hand. She went for a hug. And somehow, neither of them quite knew what to do. The moment became one of those memories that is embarrassing at the time, but hilarious years later. And there was another detail that made it even more uncomfortable. Zendaya's father was there. So picture the scene. Two young actors meeting for the first time. One expecting a handshake. The other going for a hug, both trying to figure out what the other person is doing. And everyone standing there watching. It's not exactly the glamorous beginning people might imagine for a future Hollywood power couple. But maybe that is what makes it so memorable. Because there was no polished image. No carefully constructed public persona. Just two people meeting for the first time and trying to figure each other out. And that awkwardness didn't prevent the chemistry. If anything, the connection quickly became obvious. Zendaya has explained that the audition itself was stressful. A chemistry read for a major movie can be intimidating under normal circumstances. But Tom helped make the environment more comfortable. He made her feel calm. He made her feel welcome. And that mattered. Because sometimes the strongest connections don't begin with fireworks. They begin with comfort. With the feeling that you can be yourself around someone. With the feeling that even in a room full of pressure, one person makes everything slightly easier. That seems to have been the beginning of something important between them. Not necessarily romance. Not at first. But a connection. A friendship. A professional partnership that would eventually become much more. There is another detail from that early period that makes their story even more remarkable. According to the transcript, after Zendaya left the audition room, the people involved were essentially unanimous that she was their MJ. That decision would become one of the most important casting choices in the Spider-Man franchise. Because MJ wasn't just another character. She would become one half of a relationship that audiences around the world would eventually become deeply invested in. And Tom Holland himself has spoken about how meaningful the Spider-Man role became for him. Not simply because it gave him a major career opportunity. Not simply because he got to play one of the most famous superheroes in history. But because through Spider-Man, he met the love of his life. That is a remarkable thing to say about a career-defining role. Imagine being able to look back at one of the biggest professional opportunities of your life and realize that it gave you something even more valuable than fame. It gave you a person. For Tom, Spider-Man became connected to something deeply personal. The role brought him to a world that changed his career. But it also brought Zendaya into his life. And Zendaya has reflected on the same connection from her own perspective. When asked which character had influenced her the most, she pointed towards Spider-Man. Not because it was simply another successful movie, but because it changed her life. It introduced her to someone who became her best friend. And that one detail tells us something important about how their relationship developed. Before the romance became public, before the speculation, before the headlines, there was friendship. And perhaps that foundation is one reason their bond appeared so resilient. Because friendship gives a relationship something that attraction alone cannot provide. It gives history, shared memories, inside jokes, trust, understanding, the ability to know the person behind the public image. Tom knew Zendaya beyond the actress. Zendaya knew Tom beyond Spider-Man. They had spent years working together. They had experienced the chaos of huge productions together. They had traveled for promotional tours together. They had answered endless questions together. They had watched each other's careers evolve. And they had developed a relationship that existed beyond whatever was happening in front of a camera. That history would become increasingly important. Hollywood has a long history of co-stars becoming couples. But what made Tom and Zendaya's dynamic so interesting was how naturally their friendship seemed to come through. They could joke with each other. They could challenge each other. They could compliment each other. And they could embarrass each other. That combination is powerful. Because when people are truly comfortable together, they don't always act perfectly. They interrupt. They tease. They disagree. They forget things. They laugh at each other's mistakes. And they don't seem afraid to be silly. The transcript repeatedly returns to that idea. Tom and Zendaya aren't presented as some flawless celebrity couple who always knows what to say. They're presented as two people who sometimes have absolutely no idea what the other is talking about. And that's exactly what makes their interactions feel relatable. For example, they have moments where one forgets a song. Another where they debate which Spider-Man movie a scene came from. Another where they correct each other's answers. And another where Zendaya playfully teases Tom about his age. These aren't dramatic romantic moments. They're ordinary. But ordinary moments can reveal extraordinary closeness. Because you don't usually tease someone that comfortably unless you know they can handle it. You don't casually correct someone in front of an audience unless there is trust between you. And you don't laugh through those little mistakes unless the relationship has enough security to allow imperfection. Their chemistry doesn't depend entirely on romance. It depends on familiarity. And familiarity is one of the strongest signs of a long-term bond. Of course, being close friends doesn't mean they always agree. In fact, one of the funniest elements of their relationship is their competitiveness. The transcript describes how much they love each other while also being extremely competitive. And one example comes from a lip-sync battle. Tom and Zendaya apparently agreed that they were going to keep things simple. They were going to relax. They weren't going to overdo it. They were going to have fun. That was the plan. But then the actual show happened. And suddenly there was rain. Costume changes.
Sparklers.
Backflips.
Confetti.
A private jet. And even dollar bills being showered around. Zendaya's reaction basically captures the entire situation. She had been told they were going to keep it chill. Instead, Tom turned the whole thing into an enormous production. And that tells us something about their dynamic. They may tease each other. They may compete. They may accuse each other of breaking the rules. But there is an underlying comfort there. They can challenge each other without threatening the relationship. They can compete without becoming enemies. And they can laugh about it afterward. That kind of playful rivalry is often one of the most entertaining parts of a close relationship. You want to win, but you also want the other person to succeed. And when the competition ends, you still laugh together. That appears to be exactly what happens with Tom and Zendaya. One of the strongest patterns in the transcript is Tom's tendency to praise Zendaya. And not just once. Not only when a journalist asks him directly. He repeatedly finds ways to highlight her. Fashion comes up. And Tom essentially redirects the attention towards Zendaya. She's the fashion expert. She's the person to ask. She's the queen of fashion. He talks about outfits she has worn and remembers specific looks. That might seem like a small thing. But repeated small things become meaningful. When someone constantly gives credit to another person, it can reveal how they see them. Tom doesn't seem threatened by Zendaya's success. He celebrates it. He doesn't need to be the most fashionable person in the room. He is perfectly comfortable letting her take that spotlight. And that matters because both of them have enormous careers. They could easily compete for attention. But instead, the transcript repeatedly shows Tom supporting Zendaya's strengths. He compliments her style. He admires her work. He talks about her talent. And he appears genuinely proud of her. That is a different kind of romance. It's not simply saying, "You're beautiful." It's saying, "I see what you do well, and I respect it." That kind of admiration can be much deeper. Then there is the clothing. At one point, the transcript references him wearing her leather jacket, and he has joked about wearing her heels. They share clothes. They borrow from each other's wardrobes. Again, this isn't necessarily a dramatic romantic gesture, but it gives us a glimpse into their everyday comfort. There is something intimate about sharing clothes, not because the act itself is extraordinary, but because it suggests familiarity. It suggests that personal boundaries have become relaxed, that one person's belongings can become part of the other's world. And it fits perfectly with the larger picture of their relationship. They aren't just two celebrities standing beside each other at premieres. They are people whose lives overlap. Their careers overlap. Their friendships overlap. Their humor overlaps. Even their wardrobes apparently overlap. And that is what makes their connection feel bigger than a red carpet appearance. But Tom isn't the only one constantly praising his partner. Zendaya does the same thing. She has described Tom as supportive and encouraging. She has explained that his presence makes her feel confident. And she has openly called him handsome. That mutual admiration is important. Because a healthy relationship isn't supposed to be one person constantly praising the other. The admiration should move in both directions. And that's what the transcript shows. Tom celebrates Zendaya's fashion. Zendaya celebrates Tom's appearance. Tom admires her talent. Zendaya values his support. Tom describes her as someone impossible not to love. Zendaya talks about how much she appreciates him. It creates a picture of two people who genuinely enjoy having each other in their lives. And perhaps the most powerful compliment in the transcript isn't about appearance at all. It's about trust. When asked who Tom goes to for honest acting advice, Zendaya is the person he names. He says she is probably the most honest with him. And he says he loves that because he needs it. That sentence says a lot. Because honest feedback isn't always easy to hear. If someone simply wants to make you feel good, they'll tell you everything is great. But a trusted partner can tell you when something isn't working. They can challenge you. They can question you. They can tell you the truth when everyone else is too afraid to. For an actor working at Tom's level, that kind of honesty can be incredibly valuable. And for Zendaya to occupy that role in his life suggests a relationship built on more than affection. It suggests respect. Then comes one of the most powerful descriptions in the transcript. Tom describes Zendaya as the absolute North Star of his life. Think about that phrase. A North Star is something people use to orient themselves. Something that provides direction. Something that remains visible when everything else feels uncertain. For Tom to use that kind of language shows how significant she is to him. And he doesn't stop there. He describes her as someone impossible not to love. He praises her both on screen and off screen. That distinction matters. Because being impressed by someone's acting ability is one thing. Admiring the person behind the performance is another. Tom appears to be saying that what makes Zendaya special isn't limited to her talent. He admires who she is. And that is one of the recurring themes of their story. Their professional relationship may have introduced them, but their personal relationship developed because they liked each other as people. The transcript also takes us back to their earlier dating days, when crowds and paparazzi surrounded them in Paris. Imagine trying to navigate a new relationship under those circumstances. Most couples get time to figure each other out privately. They can go to dinner without strangers watching. They can walk down the street without cameras following them. They can have awkward conversations without worrying that someone will turn the moment into a headline. Tom and Zendaya didn't necessarily have that luxury. Their relationship existed inside one of the most intense media environments imaginable. And yet the transcript emphasizes that Tom still found ways to hype Zendaya up publicly. He noticed her. He praised her. He gave her attention. And even when large crowds surrounded them, their connection seemed to remain visible. That is not easy. Celebrity relationships can be complicated because every interaction becomes content. A glance becomes a rumor. A smile becomes a headline. A disagreement becomes a breakup story. And silence can become speculation. The pressure can be enormous. But the relationship described in this transcript survived that environment. And it did so while the two people involved continued to build their careers. There is an almost poetic quality to the fact that Spider-Man brought them together. Tom became Spider-Man. Zendaya became MJ. And their fictional relationship became one of the emotional centers of the franchise. But behind the fictional romance, the actors were developing a real friendship. That creates an unusual situation. Every time they played Peter and MJ, audiences were watching two characters fall in love. Meanwhile, the actors themselves were building a bond off-screen. The line between the fictional world and their real-world friendship became part of the fascination. But the transcript reminds us that their relationship wasn't created by the movie. The movie created the opportunity. The people created the connection. And perhaps that's why the role became so meaningful to both of them. For Tom, Spider-Man wasn't merely a character. It was the role through which he met the love of his life. For Zendaya, MJ wasn't merely a character. It became part of the story through which she met her best friend. That is a remarkable legacy for a movie role. Then came the Spider-Man No Way Home press tour. This period gave audiences countless opportunities to watch Tom and Zendaya interact. And according to the transcript, it was the unscripted moments that stood out most. They could deliver polished answers. They could talk about the movie. They could promote the franchise. They could do what every major actor does during a press tour. But sometimes the most revealing moments were the ones that happened between the prepared questions. A joke, a correction, a glance, a laugh, a disagreement over a tiny detail, a compliment, a moment where one person seemed to know exactly how the other would respond. Those interactions can tell audiences something that scripted interviews cannot. Because chemistry is difficult to fake for hours and hours. You can memorize lines. You can prepare answers. But you cannot easily manufacture years of familiarity. And that familiarity was visible. They seemed comfortable. They seemed playful. They seemed to know each other's rhythms. That doesn't necessarily mean every moment should be interpreted romantically, but it does show how deeply connected they had become. One of the sweetest exchanges in the transcript comes when they are asked about the best part of playing Spider-Man and MJ. Tom says one of the best things about playing Spider-Man is getting to work with Zendaya. Then Zendaya returns the compliment. One of the best things about playing MJ is getting to work with Tom Holland. It's a simple exchange, but it captures the foundation of their professional relationship. They genuinely enjoyed working together. That matters because working with someone can be difficult. Film sets are exhausting. Schedules are demanding. Promotional tours can be repetitive. The same questions are asked again and again. Travel can be stressful. Long shoots can push people to their limits. So having someone beside you who makes the experience better can change everything. For Tom, Zendaya was that person. For Zendaya, Tom was that person. And their partnership became one of the reasons audiences connected so strongly with the Spider-Man movies. If there is one thing that appears again and again in their interactions, it is humor.
They tease.
They laugh. They misunderstand each other. They make fun of each other's mistakes. They challenge each other's answers. And they don't seem afraid of looking silly. That is important because humor can be one of the strongest forms of intimacy. When two people can laugh together, they can survive awkward moments. They can diffuse tension. They can turn mistakes into memories. And they can create a private world that other people don't fully understand. Tom and Zendaya clearly have their own language. Sometimes it's a joke. Sometimes it's a look. Sometimes it's a correction. Sometimes it's simply laughing at how ridiculous a situation has become. And those moments are part of what makes their relationship so engaging to watch. One of the funniest themes in the transcript is that neither of them seems particularly perfect at remembering things. Tom forgets details. Zendaya forgets details. They correct each other. They argue over which movie a scene came from. And instead of becoming frustrated, the mistakes become jokes.
There is something charming about that.
Because celebrity culture often presents famous people as impossibly polished. Perfect outfits. Perfect answers. Perfect relationships. Perfect lives. But Tom and Zendaya's interactions repeatedly break that illusion. They forget things. They get things wrong. They make mistakes. They laugh. And then they move on. That's part of why their chemistry feels accessible. Behind the fame, they are still two people who sometimes forget what happened in a movie they were literally in. And Zendaya isn't afraid to call Tom out, especially when it comes to his age. The transcript includes a moment where she reminds him that he's 30. Tom responds that he still has a couple of months left. It's playful. It's harmless. But it shows their comfort level. She can tease him. He can take it. And the audience gets to see a relationship where neither person has to constantly protect the other's ego. Sometimes people look for one giant piece of evidence to explain a relationship. One photograph. One interview. One declaration. One moment. But relationships aren't built from one moment. They're built from thousands. And the transcript is essentially a collection of those thousands of tiny details. Tom remembering Zendaya's outfits. Zendaya talking about Tom's support. Tom seeking her honest opinion. Zendaya calling him handsome. Them sharing clothes. Them teasing each other. Them competing. Them correcting each other. Them laughing. Them talking about work. Them supporting each other's careers. These moments create a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is what matters. One of the most interesting observations in the transcript is how their private connection can appear even during public events. Imagine being surrounded by photographers. People are shouting questions. Cameras are flashing. Everyone wants a reaction. And yet, in the middle of all that noise, two people can still find a small moment that belongs only to them. A glance. A joke. A quick comment. A shared laugh. These moments may last only seconds, but they reveal something important. Even when the world is watching, they can still create their own little space. That is difficult to explain unless you understand how familiarity works. When you have known someone for years, you don't need a long conversation. A tiny expression can be enough. A single word can make the other person laugh. A glance can communicate an entire thought. That kind of communication develops over time. And Tom and Zendaya clearly had time. Years of it. One of the most revealing anecdotes in the transcript is surprisingly simple. Tom talks about fixing Zendaya's door early in their relationship. He was hanging out at her house. The door was broken, and he decided he would fix it. At the time, it may have seemed like a small favor, but years later, he remembered it. And he joked that now they were in love. There is something almost perfect about that story. No grand romantic gesture. No expensive gift. No dramatic speech. Just a broken door. Someone says, and life continues. But looking back, the ordinary moment becomes part of the story. That is how relationships often work. The moments that become most meaningful aren't always the moments you recognize immediately. Sometimes they are ordinary days, ordinary conversations, ordinary favors, ordinary laughter. Years later, those are the memories that remain. At the center of all these moments is something simple. They see each other. Tom sees Zendaya's talent, her fashion sense, her personality, her humor, her honesty, her support. And Zendaya sees Tom,
His work, his personality,
his humor, his dedication, his ability to make her feel confident. That kind of recognition is powerful, because love isn't only about being admired. It's about being understood. And the transcript repeatedly gives us glimpses of that understanding. Tom knows Zendaya's strengths. Zendaya knows when Tom needs honest feedback. Tom knows how to make her laugh. Zendaya knows how to tease him. They know each other's habits. They know each other's weaknesses. And instead of treating those weaknesses as reasons to pull away, they turn them into jokes. That is comfort. One of the most important ideas in their story is that Zendaya has described Tom as her best friend. That changes the way we understand everything else. Because a romantic relationship built on friendship has a different foundation. Your partner isn't only the person you go on dates with. They're the person you call when something funny happens. The person whose opinion matters. The person you want beside you when you're celebrating. The person who can tell you the truth. The person who can make you laugh when you're exhausted. The person who knows your embarrassing stories. The person who remembers where you came from. That is the role Tom and Zendaya seem to play for each other. And perhaps that is why their journey feels less like a sudden celebrity romance and more like the natural evolution of a long relationship. First came the audition, then the friendship, then the shared experiences, then the trust, then something deeper. And eventually, the relationship became part of the story the world couldn't ignore. But a relationship like theirs doesn't exist in a vacuum. They were both becoming increasingly famous. Their careers were expanding. The Spider-Man franchise was becoming enormous. Every appearance generated attention. Every interaction could be analyzed. Every rumor could spread. And that creates a unique pressure. When you're dating someone privately, your relationship belongs mostly to you. When you're famous, the public often feels entitled to explanations. People want to know, are they together? Are they not together? Are they happy? Are they fighting? Are they breaking up? Are they getting married? Are they wearing matching things? Are they looking at each other differently? Every tiny detail can become a headline. The transcript references the pressures of Hollywood and rumors of separation before describing their relationship as enduring. That context is important, because the strength of a relationship isn't proven by never facing pressure. It's proven by how people navigate pressure. Tom and Zendaya had to grow personally while growing professionally, and they had to do it under observation. There is a reason audiences become emotionally invested in celebrity relationships. It's not always because they believe they know everything about the people involved. Sometimes it's because the story represents something familiar. Two people meet. They become friends. They discover they genuinely enjoy each other's company. They support each other's dreams. They tease each other. They grow together. And eventually, the friendship becomes something more. That's a universal story. The fame is unusual. The circumstances are unusual. The audience size is enormous. But the emotional foundation is recognizable. That is why Tom and Zendaya's relationship resonates. Underneath the Spider-Man costumes, red carpets, interviews, and cameras, the story is about two people who found a person they genuinely enjoy being around. Support appears repeatedly throughout the transcript. Zendaya talks about Tom being supportive and encouraging. She says his support gives her confidence. Tom says Zendaya is the person whose honesty he trusts. These statements reveal two complementary forms of support: emotional support and professional honesty. A partner can tell you you're amazing, but a great partner can also tell you when you need to improve. That combination is rare. Too much criticism can destroy confidence. Too much praise can prevent growth. But honest support creates balance. And that seems to be what they value in each other. Tom wants Zendaya's honest opinion. Zendaya values Tom's encouragement. Together, those qualities can create a powerful partnership. Another reason their relationship is so entertaining is that they don't seem obsessed with appearing perfect. They make mistakes. They get corrected. They lose arguments. They make jokes. They tease each other's age. They argue over tiny details. They can be ridiculous together. And that's healthy. Because when two people don't have to constantly maintain a perfect image around each other, they can relax. Tom doesn't always have to be Spider-Man. Zendaya doesn't always have to be the glamorous star. They can just be Tom and Zendaya. Two people joking around. Two friends. Two partners. Two people who know each other well enough to laugh at the little things. The transcript eventually moves into what it describes as their married era. And the tone changes slightly. Instead of focusing only on red carpets and movie premieres, we get a glimpse into domestic life. And one of the funniest details is that Tom apparently cannot keep a secret. Zendaya explains that she might tell him something privately and specifically ask him not to tell his brothers. But then Tom tells someone else. And then someone else. And suddenly the secret is no longer a secret. That is a very different kind of celebrity story. It doesn't involve glamour. It involves a couple at home. It involves conversations at the end of the day. It involves one person explaining something to the other. And it involves Tom apparently giving full play-by-play descriptions of his movie shoots. Zendaya describes him coming home and explaining what happened during the day. He paints the entire picture.
He tells the story.
He recreates the moment. He talks about what he did. This is the kind of detail that makes a relationship feel human. Because people don't only share glamorous moments. They share boring moments. They talk about work. They complain. They tell stories. They repeat details. They explain things that probably aren't interesting to anyone else. And that is part of intimacy. There is something almost funny about imagining Tom Holland, one of the world's most recognizable actors, coming home after a long movie shoot and immediately giving Zendaya a detailed recap of his day. To millions of people, Tom Holland is Spider-Man. To Zendaya, he's the person standing at the end of the bed explaining what happened on set. That contrast is powerful. Because celebrity can make people seem larger than life. But relationships bring people back down to earth. The famous actor becomes your partner. The movie star becomes the person telling you a story you've already heard 3 times. The superhero becomes the person who can't keep a secret. And that ordinary side may be one of the most valuable parts of their relationship. Even as their relationship grows deeper, the teasing doesn't disappear. If anything, it becomes part of their language. Zendaya playfully roasts Tom. Tom responds. They challenge each other. They joke about names. They talk about nicknames. Tom explains that people close to him can call him T, while people extremely close might call him Tommy. Zendaya apparently has her own perspective on that. And again, it isn't the kind of interaction you'd expect from 2 celebrities carefully managing every sentence. It's casual. It's silly. It's personal. And that's why it works. The audience isn't just watching a famous couple. They're watching 2 people who have spent enough time together to develop their own sense of humor. Perhaps the most important point to understand is that this story wasn't created overnight. It developed. The audition was the beginning. Then came the films, the rehearsals, the long days, the press tours, the interviews, the public appearances, the jokes, the friendship, the shared experiences, the professional support, and eventually the personal relationship. Every stage added another layer. That is why the story feels so complete. If you only look at the romantic headlines, you miss the foundation. If you only look at Spider-Man, you miss the friendship. If you only look at the red carpets, you miss the private jokes. If you only look at the interviews, you miss the years of shared experiences. To understand the relationship, you have to look at the entire journey. For audiences, Spider-Man gave them movies. For Tom and Zendaya, according to their own comments in the transcript, it gave them much more. It gave them careers. It gave them memories. It gave them a shared creative experience. And it gave them each other. That's why Tom's statement about meeting the love of his life through the character carries so much weight. He could have talked about box office success. He could have talked about playing a legendary superhero. He could have talked about working with talented directors and actors. Instead, one of the things he associates most strongly with the role is meeting Zendaya. And Zendaya similarly connects Spider-Man with meeting her best friend. That creates a beautiful symmetry. The same movie brought them both into a new chapter of their lives. People often use the word chemistry when talking about actors. But chemistry can mean many things. Two actors can have great chemistry on screen without having any relationship off-screen. What makes Tom and Zendaya's story different is the connection that developed outside the fictional characters. Their chemistry on screen was part of the movie. Their friendship was part of real life. And the two things existed alongside each other. That created a unique dynamic. Peter and MJ had their story. Tom and Zendaya had theirs. The audience could enjoy both. And over time, the boundary between the fictional romance and the real friendship became one of the most fascinating parts of the franchise's cultural impact. The loudest moments in a relationship are not always the most meaningful. Sometimes the quiet moments tell the real story. A partner listening. A partner giving honest advice. A partner remembering details. A partner helping fix something. A partner encouraging you before you walk into a room. A partner laughing at your jokes. A partner teasing you because they know exactly how you'll react. A partner sitting at home while you explain your entire day. These moments don't always make headlines, but they make relationships. And the transcript is filled with these small examples. That is why the story feels bigger than a collection of celebrity appearances. It's about the ordinary moments hiding inside an extraordinary life. At the beginning, they were simply co-stars. Two actors cast in one of the biggest movie franchises in the world. Then they became friends. They learned each other's personalities. They learned how to work together. They developed chemistry. They became trusted people in each other's lives. And eventually their relationship evolved. That progression matters. Because it suggests that the strongest part of their story wasn't the moment romance appeared. It was everything that came before it. Friendship gave them a foundation. Work gave them shared experiences. Time gave them history. Trust gave them stability. And affection brought everything together. Consider the little things again. The awkward handshake and hug. The audition. The unanimous reaction to Zendaya as MJ. Tom talking about meeting the love of his life. Zendaya describing Spider-Man as the role that introduced her to her best friend. Their competitiveness. The lip-sync battle. The fashion compliments. The shared clothes. The puppy jokes. The honest acting advice. The forgotten song. The arguments over movie scenes. The age jokes. The broken door. The press tour. The domestic stories. None of these moments alone tells the entire story, but put them together and they create a portrait. And that portrait is of two people who seem deeply familiar with one another. They know how to make each other laugh. They know how to challenge each other. They know how to support each other. They know how to embarrass each other. And perhaps most importantly, they seem comfortable being themselves around each other. If there is a secret to their relationship hidden inside this transcript, it may not be romance at all. It may be friendship. Because attraction can bring people together. Fame can make them visible. A movie can introduce them. But friendship is what gives people a reason to stay connected when the cameras disappear. Tom and Zendaya didn't just build a relationship around public appearances. They built a history. And history matters. When you've shared major career moments with someone, you understand what they've overcome. You remember the nervous beginning. You remember the first audition. You remember the awkward introductions. You remember the early jokes. You remember the first time you realized this person was special. And as life changes, those memories become part of the relationship. Maybe the most beautiful part of their beginning is that it wasn't perfect. There was an awkward greeting. There was nervousness. There was uncertainty. There were mistakes. But those imperfections became part of the story. And that's a reminder that meaningful relationships don't always begin in perfect circumstances. Sometimes they begin awkwardly. Sometimes you don't recognize the importance of a person immediately. Sometimes the person who eventually becomes central to your life first appears as a stranger standing across an audition room. You don't know what the future holds. You simply meet. You talk. You work together. You laugh. And slowly, without realizing it, that person becomes part of your life. By the time audiences were watching Tom and Zendaya together during major Spider-Man promotions, the dynamic had become impossible to ignore. They knew each other's rhythms. They could finish each other's jokes. They could challenge each other's answers. They could make each other laugh with almost no effort. And, behind the scenes, their connection continued developing. The public saw the movie, the red carpets, the interviews,
The jokes.
but the people involved were experiencing something much more personal. They were growing together, and as their careers expanded, so did the attention surrounding them. The relationship faced the inevitable pressure that comes with fame. Rumors, speculation, paparazzi, public curiosity. And yet the transcript ultimately frames their journey as one that survived those challenges. From close co-stars to best friends, from best friends to partners, from partners to what the transcript describes as husband and wife. The story became much larger than the movie that introduced them. For years, audiences watched Peter Parker and MJ fall in love on screen. But behind those characters was another story unfolding. Tom and Zendaya were becoming increasingly important to each other, and that created a unique kind of connection for fans. The fictional relationship was written by screenwriters. The real friendship was not. The fictional characters had dialogue. The real Tom and Zendaya had inside jokes. The fictional characters had scripted romantic scenes. The real people had years of shared experiences. The fictional story had a beginning, middle, and ending. The real relationship continued long after the cameras stopped rolling. And that is what makes their story so fascinating. Celebrity headlines often reduce people to simple labels. Actor, actress, couple, Spider-Man stars, Hollywood favorites. But people are more complicated than headlines. Tom isn't only Spider-Man. Zendaya isn't only MJ. They are two people with families, careers, personalities, fears, jokes, habits, and private lives. The transcript gives us glimpses of those people. Tom is the guy who apparently talks too much about his movie days. The guy who can't always keep a secret. The guy who gets competitive. The guy who wants compliments. The guy who loves Zendaya's clothes. The guy who values her honesty. Zendaya is the person who supports him. The person who corrects him. The person who teases him. The person he trusts. The person who can make him feel grounded. Those details humanize them. There is a difference between performing affection and simply being comfortable. Performance requires effort. Comfort doesn't. When two people have been together long enough, they don't have to think about every reaction. They can laugh naturally. They can interrupt. They can correct. They can tease. They can. And be quiet. And the relationship doesn't collapse under the weight of imperfection. That seems to be one of the strongest impressions created by the transcript. Tom and Zendaya don't always look polished. They look comfortable. And comfort is powerful. Laughter appears again and again. The awkward first meeting becomes funny. The competitive moments become funny. The fashion conversations become funny. The memory mistakes become funny. The age joke becomes funny. The nickname conversation becomes funny. Even the domestic stories become funny. Laughter is not just entertainment. It can be a form of connection. When two people can laugh together, they create shared memories. And those memories become part of the relationship's identity. For Tom and Zendaya, humor appears to be one of the strongest threads connecting all the different stages of their story. Hollywood can be incredibly loud. Cameras, questions, rumors, premieres, social media, fans, paparazzi. But every relationship needs some quiet. The transcript's most meaningful moments often come when the focus moves away from spectacle. A broken door, shared clothes, an honest opinion, a joke at home, a recap of a workday, a private laugh during a public event. Those are the moments that remind us that behind the celebrity story is a normal relationship. And perhaps that's why those moments are so powerful. They aren't designed for an audience. They simply happen. Tom trusts Zendaya to tell him the truth. Zendaya trusts Tom to support her. They trust each other enough to tease. They trust each other enough to be imperfect. And they trust each other enough to share their lives. That kind of trust doesn't appear overnight. It takes time. It takes consistency. It takes shared experiences. It takes knowing that when the world becomes complicated, there is someone standing beside you. The transcript's journey from audition to partnership is essentially a journey toward deeper trust. Both Tom and Zendaya have massive careers. Yet the transcript doesn't present them as rivals. Instead, they celebrate each other. Tom praises Zendaya's work and style. Zendaya supports Tom's career. Tom values her professional honesty. Zendaya appreciates his encouragement. Their success doesn't appear to diminish the other person's achievements. It strengthens the partnership. That is important, because when two talented people are together, the relationship works best when each person can shine independently. And Tom seems comfortable letting Zendaya shine. Zendaya seems comfortable supporting Tom. That balance is one of the strongest elements of their dynamic. And this is only the beginning of the story, because everything we've seen so far leads to a bigger question. How did two awkward young co-stars become two people who would eventually build a life together? How did that first audition turn into years of friendship? How did the playful chemistry become something deeper? How did they navigate the enormous pressure of being watched? And how did they preserve the humor and friendship that made their connection special in the first place? The answers aren't found in one interview. They're found across years of moments. The broken door, the press tours, the jokes, the competitions, the compliments, the clothes, the honest advice, the movie memories, the private stories, the public support. Each moment adds another piece to the puzzle. And when you put those pieces together, a much bigger picture appears. Maybe that's the biggest lesson from their journey. There wasn't one magical moment that created everything. It was a collection of moments. Some funny, some awkward. Both Tom and Zendaya have massive careers. Yet the transcript doesn't present them as rivals. Instead, they celebrate each other. Tom praises Zendaya's work and style. Zendaya supports Tom's career. Tom values her professional honesty. Zendaya appreciates his encouragement. Their success doesn't appear to diminish the other person's achievements. It strengthens the partnership. That is important, because when two talented people are together, the relationship works best when each person can shine independently. And Tom seems comfortable letting Zendaya shine. Zendaya seems comfortable supporting Tom. That balance is one of the strongest elements of their dynamic. And this is only the beginning of the story, because everything we've seen so far leads to a bigger question. How did two awkward young co-stars become two people who would eventually build a life together? How did that first audition turn into years of friendship? How did the playful chemistry become something deeper? How did they navigate the enormous pressure of being watched? And how did they preserve the humor and friendship that made their connection special in the first place? The answers aren't found in one interview. They're found across years of moments. The broken door, the press tours, the jokes, the competitions, the compliments, the clothes, the honest advice, the movie memories, the private stories, the public support. Each moment adds another piece to the puzzle. And when you put those pieces together, a much bigger picture appears. Maybe that's the biggest lesson from their journey. There wasn't one magical moment that created everything. It was a collection of moments. Some funny, some awkward. A handshake became a hug. An awkward moment became a funny memory. A casting decision became a career-defining partnership. A friendship became something deeper. And Spider-Man became much more than a superhero story. It became part of their real-life story. Looking back, perhaps the early signs weren't hidden at all. Tom immediately admired Zendaya. Zendaya felt comfortable around Tom. They became close. They made each other laugh. They supported each other. They trusted each other's opinions. They spent more time together. And slowly, the relationship developed. The world may have wanted a dramatic explanation, but their story seems much more natural. Two people met. They connected. They became friends. And life took them somewhere neither could have predicted. That is why the story remains so compelling. By the end of this chapter, one thing becomes clear. Tom and Zendaya's relationship cannot be understood simply by looking at photographs. You have to look at the pattern. The pattern of support. The pattern of respect. The pattern of humor. The pattern of friendship. The pattern of admiration. The pattern of trust. Those patterns are more revealing than any single moment. And perhaps that is what makes their journey so different from the typical Hollywood romance. The foundation came first. The friendship came first. The ability to laugh together came first. The ability to trust each other came first. And everything else grew from there. So when Tom describes Zendaya as the North Star of his life, it doesn't feel like an isolated compliment. It fits into everything else we've seen. When he calls her someone impossible not to love, it fits. When Zendaya says he makes her feel confident, it fits. When she calls him handsome, it fits. When she describes his support, it fits. When he says she's the person whose honesty he trusts most, it fits. When they tease each other, it fits. When they laugh at each other's mistakes, it fits. When they talk about their ordinary life together, it fits. Every piece tells the same story. It is almost unbelievable to think that this entire journey can be traced back to such a simple moment. Two young actors, one audition, one awkward greeting, one handshake that was supposed to happen, one hug that happened instead, and a room full of people trying to figure out whether these two strangers had the chemistry needed to become Spider-Man and MJ. They couldn't have known what was coming. They couldn't have predicted the movies, the fame, the interviews, the headlines, the rumors, the relationship, the years of shared memories, or the life they would eventually build. But perhaps that is exactly what makes the beginning so beautiful. The biggest chapters of our lives rarely announce themselves when they begin. Sometimes they start with an awkward hello. Sometimes they start with a joke. Sometimes they start with someone helping fix a broken door. And sometimes they start with two people simply realizing that they genuinely like being around each other. For Tom Holland and Zendaya, that first meeting became the opening chapter of a story that would eventually reach far beyond Spider-Man. And if part one has shown us anything, it's that the foundation of their relationship was never just fame. It was friendship. It was laughter.
It was trust.
It was respect. And it was the ability to make each other feel at home even when the entire world was watching. But the most fascinating part of their journey was still ahead. Because once the friendship became something deeper, the stakes changed. The cameras became more intense. The rumors became louder. The public became more curious. And every interaction began to carry a different meaning. The question was no longer simply whether Tom Holland and Zendaya had chemistry. The question became whether the bond that began as friendship could survive the extraordinary pressure of Hollywood. And that is where the next chapter becomes even more interesting. Because the story of Tom and Zendaya isn't simply about how two people fell in love. It's about how they continued choosing each other while the world kept watching.